Welcome to the Flash Essential Training Series. I'm Mike King, your host. And in this tutorial, we're actually going to talk about communicating with MovieClips in ActionScript 3. So in this tutorial, we're going to start our journey by learning how to communicate with objects in ActionScript 3. The first thing we need to do in order to communicate with Flash is to make certain that the items we want to communicate with are converted to symbols, and a symbol is a type of predefined class inside of ActionScript 3. What we're going to do is bring some movie clips onto our stage, give them instance names so then we can communicate with them using ActionScript 3, and then we'll also add a shape to this stage and convert it to a movie clip and communicate with that also. So let's move into our development environment and work through some exercises. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and drop out of our presentation. Let's go back into our development environment. I'm going to open up Flash. I'm using Flash CS55 for this particular example. You'll notice I've got a branding layer on this Flash movie. That's going to be our branding layer for OnTarget HTML5. That'll be within all our movie clips. So you can just kind of disregard that layer. Let me go ahead and save this file. And what I want to do now is I want to add a layer to our timeline. So I'm going to come right up here, I'm going to select that branding layer, and I'm going to either add a layer using my icon for the new layer, or I can actually just right click to add a new layer. I'm just going to go ahead and use the icon, and I want to name this layer graphics. Go ahead and hit my enter key. And this is the layer we're going to be working with for the first part of this exercise. So I'm going to select frame 1 of my graphics layer. So I'm just going to click right in frame 1 if you're not familiar with how we use Flash. I'm going to select my rectangle tool, and that's going to be, you notice I've got my toolbar, my graphics tools are on the left, and I've got all my panels on the right. That's the way I normally keep my screen set up with my timeline at the top. If you want to go ahead and pause the movie, you can go ahead and mimic my screen. Or you can just work with the screen as you're most comfortable with, because I mean you can use your toolbars in any way. I'm just going to go ahead and select my rectangle tool. I want to select the rectangle. I'm just going to confirm that I've got a fill color and a line color for my rectangle. And I'm going to go ahead and just draw a small rectangle on our stage. Again, it can be any size you want, any colors you want to use. It's not really going to make a difference for this particular exercise. Then I want to use my selection tool, and there's a couple ways we can do that. We can actually use the V key, which is the shortcut for the selection tool. I can just press the V, or I can just go up here and select it from my panel. And I'm going to go ahead and select my rectangle. And the first thing I want you to notice is that we've only selected the fill if I click in the rectangle itself. And that's something with Flash you need to understand. I can actually select the fill and move the fill out by itself. I'm going to go ahead and do a Control Z to undo that. If I wanted to select the entire rectangle, I can do it a couple of different ways. I can either drag all the way around it. Now I have the fill and the line color, or I can just double click it. And you'll notice the difference in the selection. You'll notice that now it expands that line color around it. If I just select the fill itself, it's a very light selection. If I double click, it actually becomes very dark, and it highlights that line color around the outside of the rectangle. So again, something to keep in mind, I'm just going to use the selection tool. I'm going to drag around the entire rectangle to select it. And on my menu bar, I want to go ahead and convert this to a symbol. A couple different ways that we can do that. We can actually go under the Modify menu, Convert to Symbol, or what I like to do is I actually like to use my shortcut key, so I'll make sure it's selected and press F8, and that will bring up my Convert to Symbol dialog box. And we'll be using this a lot throughout these tutorials, so it's something to get used to. What I want to do in here is I want to make certain that this is set as a movie clip. I've got my registration in the upper left-hand corner, and I just want to give this a name of MC Rectangle. So I'm actually going to convert this to a symbol with the name of MC Rectangle. That's just telling me it's a movie clip and that I've just named it Rectangle to be a little bit descriptive of what I'm doing. Then I'm just going to go ahead and click that OK button. So now you'll notice that that symbol is different than it was in our original rectangle. Now if I click on it, I'm actually selecting the rectangle itself, the symbol, not just the drawn object, because the drawn object no longer exists. We've converted it to a symbol. What I do want to do is I want to show you that when we did that, it actually became a part of our library. You'll see now that we have this MC rectangle that's in the library that we're going to be working with throughout this demonstration. So it's become a part of our library. And again, if you don't have your library panel up, you can actually select it under the Windows menu. Just go ahead and select library. So if you want to see it in your toolbars, I actually have mine docked on the right-hand side of my screen. I have actually the internal library and an external library that are docked on the left hand of my screen, and you'll see why as we move through the tutorials how I use those. So now I'm going to make sure that my symbol's selected, and I want to go up and look at the properties for this particular symbol. So I'm going to select the rectangle, go up here, and again, my properties panel I have docked on the right-hand side of my screen. You can actually bring yours up. Again, under the drop-down window, you can select the properties if you want to bring it out. So what I want to do now is I want to discuss how I use my properties panel and the naming conventions that I use inside of ActionScript. Instance names become a very important part in Flash, and actually in any programming language. Some simple rules should be followed when naming items. Lowercase letters for the first character. Start symbol names with a lowercase letter. You can use numbers 1 through 9 in an instance name, but not as the first character. You want to use descriptive names when you're naming items, and I tend to use camel case when naming items with multiple words. And we'll talk about that as we go through these tutorials. Remember, when referencing items in ActionScript, you must type out the assigned name exactly. So capitalization must be the same in the reference and the name, or it will not work. So this is all case sensitive, as most programming languages are. And another thing I never do is I never use special characters. Special characters can cause all kinds of problems, not only with ActionScript, but with many other programming languages. So don't use special characters inside your instance names. Also, never use spaces in your names. As I said earlier, using camel case to separate words is the best practice. If the space is really needed, if you really feel that you have to have a space inside the name itself, then use the underscore key, but don't leave a blank space. Never use periods in your file names or symbol names. Never use forward slashes, as these can be misinterpreted as path locations not only in Flash, but in many programming languages. So you never want to use a forward slash in a name of a symbol. Keep these rules in mind and you'll be well on your way to becoming a much better programmer. So camel case, no special characters. We don't start names with a number. If you're going to separate the words, you want to use an underscore. Don't leave a blank. And again, we'll go back through these over and over again as we go through these tutorials. So outside, you'll notice when I'm outside the symbol, my properties panel goes to the document itself. When I select the symbol, the properties change to that particular property. So let's explain some stuff about this rectangle. Notice here that we've got an X coordinate, Y coordinate, a width and a height. All these are adjustable not only from in here, so if I want to make this 120 pixels wide, I can click it right there. 120 pixels high, I can click it right there. Now I have an exact square. If I wanted to place this exactly 100 pixels on the x-axis, it's 100 pixels from the left edge. If I wanted it exactly 100 pixels from the top axis, now it's 100 pixels from the y. And again, x is left to right, y is top to bottom. Very important that you understand these things. So let's go ahead and give this symbol a name. And up here in the instance name, I'm going to name this rectangle1 underscore MC. And I'm using the underscore MC because I'm just letting myself know when I'm dealing with this on the stage that this is acting as a movie clip. You notice when we converted it to a symbol, we left it as a movie clip. That just tells me that it's acting as a movie clip, and that's how I'm going to be treating it when I'm programming it. Instance names should follow the same conventions that we just spoke about. In other words, no special characters, no periods, no forward slashes, no spaces. Do not name the instance name the same name as I gave it in the library. In other words, you'll notice in my library, I actually called this MC rectangle, and I started the rectangle with a capital R. That's camel case. And I don't want to use that same name when I'm naming the symbol in the properties panel. So when I'm giving it an instance name, don't use the same name that I used in the library. And you'll see why as we work through this exercise. Because we can actually have multiple instances of that same rectangle on the stage. All right, so we've created a rectangle, we've put it on our stage. Let's go ahead and save our work. Let me go ahead and open up that property panel. Now would be a great time to pause if you want to go ahead and copy what we've done here. All right, so now let's look at some of the tools that we can use. I've deselected that rectangle. We go ahead and close the properties panel. Let's look at some of the tools that we can use on the left-hand side of our screen when we're dealing with symbols. The first thing I want to do, let's look at this free transform tool. So I'm going to go ahead, the shortcut for the free transform tool is the Q key, or you can just select it from the toolbar. I'm going to select the free transform tool. I'm going to click on my symbol, and you'll notice now we have 8 handles that appeared around that particular shape. So I can position the cursor over any of these different axes to actually affect or impact this symbol. Let's go ahead and open up the property panel so you can see what I mean by impact. If I were to drag this, you'll notice that my X and W are changing, because not only am I changing it now because it's actually going from the registration point, which is in the center. So not only am I making it wider, but I'm actually making my X axis narrower because I'm moving it closer to that left edge of the screen. Same thing if I were to drag it up. You'll notice I'm impacting the Y and the H. And again, all based on where this registration point is located. We actually set that when we converted this to a movie clip. And we'll work with those more and more as we go through our exercises. I can also rotate it by these corners. You'll notice I get that little rotation symbol when I get next to the corner. And I can stretch it out. I can either stretch it out by pulling the corner, or if I hold the Shift key down, it will maintain its current proportion and stretch it out. So there's a lot of different things that we can do with the tools and with the settings of the properties panel. I'm going to go ahead and do Control Z to undo all those changes because I want to get back to where we were. And that'll put the shape back into the way it was. So in my library panel, I'm going to go ahead and open up the library panel, my internal library. Let me go ahead and close out this properties panel. Open up my internal library panel. I want to drag another instance of this rectangle onto my stage. So I'm just going to drag one more. So now I actually have 2 of these, and I actually could have dragged it from that position or actually dragged it from the name. Either way, it doesn't make a difference. So now I have 2 instances of the rectangle on my stage. What I want to do with this one, I'm going to go ahead and collapse this particular screen, collapse my properties panel. I want to go ahead and give this an instance name also. So I'm going to select that second rectangle, open up my properties panel, and I'm going to call this rectangle 2 underscore MC. And now I have 2 instances of the same rectangle. I'm going to go back to my selection tool. 2 instances of the same rectangle on my stage, but they have different instance names. So I'm going to be treating these things as if they're 2 individual objects, even though they're made from the same object inside my libraries panel. So let's go ahead and select that rectangle 2, and you'll notice we've got a lot of things that we can set here inside the properties panel. Let's go ahead and look at the tint on this particular rectangle. So I've got my rectangle 2 selected. Under my color effect, I'm going to grab the drop down menu. I'm going to select tint, and I'm just going to select a different color. Let's give it this nice dark blue. So now I've actually got this tint, a nice dark blue, and I can actually change the settings all inside here. So if I wanted an exact color and I had the RGB values, the red, green, and blue values, I could actually punch them in, type them into these settings, and I'd get the exact color I wanted. Or if I wanted to locate an RGB value, I could select the color, and it would tell me what the RGB value is based on the 70% tint that I have. Let's put this back to 100%. That would give me a true red. So there's a lot of things that we can affect inside the property panel based on our symbols. I'm going to go ahead and select a yellow color for this. Again, just so we have 2 different colors. I could also select 20% in this particular tint if I wanted to actually make this a lot lighter. Now it's more of a greenish color because again, we're taking some of the tint out of that color and we're adjusting that from inside the properties panel. I could actually work with brightness. And again, I could make this 100% or anywhere to 0. So 0 would be the true color, and then 100% would be full bright. So now we've got all these movie clips on our stage. They came from the single symbol in the library. Let's go ahead and set this back so we can actually do some more experimenting with this as we work forward. And let's go ahead and give it a different color because I don't want to have it the same color because of what we're getting ready to do. Let's just make this, like I said, that nice dark blue, and we'll leave it just like that. I should point out that even though we've modified the instances on the stage, nothing in the library has been modified. If I were to go back into my library and pull another instance of this, it's going to be the same exact rectangle that we originally created and made a movie clip. I'm going to go ahead and select that and delete it from our stage. So none of the changes have affected the symbol itself, and that's true with all symbols in Flash. Any modifications that we make on the stage do not have any impact on the library symbol itself. One other thing I do want to point out before we move on, let's go ahead and close this library panel. I'm going to select one of our movie clips that are on the stage and open up the properties panel. The property panel will change based on what we have selected. In other words, there's certain properties that are available for movie clips. There are certain properties that are available for buttons. There are certain properties that are available for graphics. And based on what we have selected, these properties will change. They'll either expand, we'll get more properties, or we'll get less properties based on what we have selected on our stage. So keep that in mind. We're going to see things as we work through our exercises that are going to change based on whether or not I'm working with a graphic, a movie clip, a button. You're going to see different properties inside of our property inspector. Again, selecting this movie clip, if I were to change the height of the movie clip, it's going to impact my X and Y and my width and height settings inside the property panel itself. Same thing with the free transform tool. So what I want to do now, let's name the instances so we can make changes to these instances in ActionScript. You'll notice we've given this an instance name of rectangle1_MC. This has an instance name of rectangle2, and actually I spelled that wrong. Let's go back and fix that. Rectangle2_MC. So because they have two separate instance names, they're going to be treated differently once we start dealing with them in ActionScript. Just like two individual items, even though they're created from the same library item. So let's go ahead and save that work. I think you should have everything we're doing. What I want to do now is I want to insert another layer. So I'm going to select my graphics layer and insert a layer right above it. And I want to call this layer Actions. You will see as you work through the exercises with me, and I'm also going to lock this Actions layer, I tend to keep all my actions separated from the stuff that I'm actually working with on the stage. And there'll be times as we're working through these tutorials where I'll have multiple actions layers depending upon what I'm actually referring to in those actions. If I'm working with external databases, I may create an actions layer just for those databases. If I'm working with animation, I may have an actions layer just for the animations. And again, it makes it easier for me to maintain the files and define things as the files become large, because some of the Flash files can become quite complex depending upon what we're doing. So we've created this actions layer. I'm going to go ahead and select the actions layer. I've already got it locked. I tend to keep my actions layer locked so I don't accidentally put symbols on the actions layer itself. And now I want to open up my actions panel. A couple different ways we can do that. We can actually do it from our windows. Up here we can select the actions panel. I tend to use F9, which is the shortcut in Windows, or Option F9, which is the shortcut in Mac. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my actions panel, and let's talk about some of the things that we're seeing. Since this is our first tutorial in here, let's talk about some of the things that are available inside my actions panel. I have my script pane where I actually enter all my code. That's this big open window. Then I actually have the script navigator where I can actually move around my timeline. As our timelines become bigger, we get more and more scenes. You'll see that these things are going to become very large. We can actually select different areas of the timeline right inside this navigation panel. I have my toolbar up top, which allows me to put in remarks, allows me to close that pane if I don't want to see the script, the navigation pane. I can put in remarks. I've got debug options, and you'll see as we enter code in here, all these actions or all these buttons will come alive. Not going to be using code hinting as we work through these tutorials because I want you to get used to what the language is, and the best way to do that is to actually work through the exercises and type it. You actually have code hinting available inside your actions panel. There's been some issues reported with code hinting in CS5 and CS6. I've actually done some research with Adobe or on the Adobe website. There's no real good fixes. So if your code hinting is not working, don't panic. It's something that they are aware of and they are working to try to correct it. We have code snippets. We have the actions toolbox for selecting items. We can bring up help, and again, we'll work through all that stuff as we go through these tutorials. The first thing I want to do in my actions panel is let's enter a stop command. And that actually stops the timeline from moving forward. In other words, scrolling through animation as we work through our exercises. You'll see me use the stop command a lot as we work through the exercises inside of ActionScript. Next thing I want to do is I want to come down a couple lines, and I'm going to skip lines so it's easier for you to read what I'm doing. And I want to refer to my rectangle 1. And if you remember correctly, I'm going to go ahead and close this action panel. We actually gave this first rectangle an instance name of rectangle1_MC. That's what I'm going to be referring to when I actually get in here and refer to rectangle 1 underscore MC. I'm referring to that particular movie clip that's on my stage. So I'm going to put a period or dot, and then I want to say alpha. So what I'm actually doing now is I'm addressing that property of alpha for rectangle 1 underscore MC. And I'm going to say equals 0.5. And then I'm going to end that with a semicolon. That's how we create a statement in ActionScript. And again, you're going to get plenty of practice as we go through this. Let's go ahead and save that change. Let's close our actions panel. And now when I test this movie using Control or Enter on the PC or Command Return on the Mac, you're going to see that the alpha of this particular triangle should have decreased to 50%. And you notice it's much lighter than it appears on our stage. And the reason being is because we've assigned that alpha a 0.5 inside of ActionScript. Alpha settings can be anywhere from 0 to 1. In fact, I'm going to put a little note in here because you'll have the copy of this with the exercise file if you have access to those. So the alpha settings can be 0 to 1, anywhere in between there. So by using 0.5, I'm giving it a 50% alpha setting for that particular rectangle. And again, if we test the movie, Control Enter Windows, Command Return on the Mac, you'll see that it's 50%. If I were to actually go in here and make this 0.1 and save that change and test that movie, now it will only be 10%. So it would be just barely visible on our screen inside of our test movie. It's just barely visible there. Again, let's go ahead and close the movie. And we can refer to many, many different properties or many, many different characteristics of our symbols inside of ActionScript. As we work through these exercises, you're going to see we do this with a whole lot of different things. For instance, what if I wanted to rotate? Let's go into rectangle 2. And that was rectangle 2 underscore MC. Remember, we're referring to the instance name. And I say rotation. And I put the rotation equals, and keep in mind this is 0 to 360 degrees. So I'm going to say rotation 90. And I'm going to end that with a semicolon. So what I'm doing is I'm telling ActionScript to take that second symbol, that second movie clip, rectangle 2 underscore MC, and rotate it 90 degrees. Let's go ahead and save that change. And actually, let's make this 45 degrees. Since it's a square, you may not see 90 degrees well. Let's go ahead and save that. Go back inside of our movie file itself and test the movie with Control Enter in Windows, Command Return on the Mac. And you'll notice now that that second rectangle has rotated 90 degrees. So we've actually gotten a rotation here inside ActionScript. And keep in mind, let's go ahead and let me do something right here. Inside this test movie, you'll notice right now that both of these are acting as movie clips. There's nothing different. I can't select them. I don't see anything funny going on. But if I were to make one of these a button mode, let's go ahead back into our ActionScript. And let's say rectangle 2 underscore MC. Again, name has to be exact. Dot button mode equal true. So now what I've actually told ActionScript and what I've told the symbol on my stage is that I want you to act like a button. And you'll see us use these a lot as we work through the tutorials. Let's go ahead and save that, collapse our actions panel, and test our movie. Because now not only do we have the button, but when I go over it, you'll notice now I get the symbol saying that I can actually click on it. Now I don't have an add event listener to it, so it's not doing anything, but it is acting like a button on my stage. And that's why we're getting that little hand symbol when we hover over it. A whole lot of stuff that we can do inside of ActionScript as we work with symbols in Flash. And as you work through the tutorials, we're going to slowly build upon all these different things. But I wanted you to understand we can draw graphics onto our stage. We can convert those graphics to symbols. In this case, we converted them to movie clips. And by giving those movie clips an instance name, we can actually refer to them inside of our ActionScript code. And again, as you work through the tutorials, we're slowly going to build on what we can do with all these different things that we're working with in Flash. One other thing I want to cover real quick before we go back to our presentation to review what we've discussed is there's a lot of good help that's built into Flash itself. I can actually double click these keywords in Flash, or actually they're actually functions that are built into Flash, but I can actually double click these and hit my F1 key, and it will actually bring up the information on that particular object inside of Flash. And you notice it tells me that alpha is a property of Flash. Its value is a number, so I actually can put a number, and you'll notice we actually did that inside of Flash. We actually used a number to signify what we were doing with it. It tells me when it became available. In other words, language version ActionScript 3.0 indicates the alpha transparency value of the object specified. Values, the valid values are 0, which is fully transparent, to 1, which is fully opaque. And the default value is 1. So if we don't give it a value, it's always going to default to 1. This works for any of these objects that we have in Flash. If I were to double click on the button mode and then hit my F1 key, it will bring up the help screen for that button mode. Now, one thing you want to make certain of, because this is live help through the Adobe community, you want to make certain you're connected to the internet. This is not something that's built into your application. This is actually going out to Adobe and grabbing the most recent information on that particular, in this case, it's a sprite. It's actually going and grabbing that information from Adobe to tell you when it was available and what we can do with it and how we can actually program it. You're going to see me use this a lot as we go through these exercises, because the Adobe help files are very helpful, not only in helping you learn what you can do with Flash inside of ActionScript, but also to give you a lot more information on those particular sprites or objects that we're using as we go through the tutorials. So keep that in mind. You can always, again, double click on any of the words in here, press F1 to bring up the help files for that particular part. In this case, that particular reference on what that rotation property does inside of Flash and ActionScript 3. All right, so let's move back into our presentation to kind of go over what we've talked about in this particular tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and minimize our development environment and go back into my presentation. So the V key is a shortcut for the selection tool. We talked about that. And best practices in naming items on our stage. This is very important, so let's keep this in mind. Lowercase letters for the first character. Start symbol names with lowercase letters. You can use numbers 1 through 9 in an instance name, but not as the first character. And again, this is all best practices. And you'll find that not only is this for ActionScript 3, but for most programming languages. Use descriptive names when you're naming your items. Use camel case when naming items with multiple words. Remember, when referencing items in ActionScript, you must type out the assigned name exactly as you named it when you're referencing in ActionScript. Capitalization must be the same in the reference and the name, or it will not work. Do not use special characters. Special characters can cause problems with ActionScript, and actually special characters can cause problems with many programming languages. So stay away from special characters when you're naming your symbols. Stay away from special characters and when you're naming your variables. These same best practices fall true with variables also. Never use spaces inside your names. As I said earlier, use camel case to separate words. If space is needed, use the underscore key. Never use periods in your file or symbol names. Never use forward slashes. These are misinterpreted as path locations in Flash and again in many other programming languages. So never use forward slashes in the names of any of your symbols or variables. When you're communicating with MovieClips, I always use the underscore MC. You don't have to do that. That's just something that I do so I can keep track of my symbols on my stage, because you're going to find as we work through the future tutorials, we're going to have a lot of different types of symbols. So I always use that underscore MC, underscore BTN, underscore GI for gift. I mean, there's a lot of different symbols that I use, BMP, and I always use the underscore so I know what I'm referencing. Control Z to undo changes if you're working on a PC, Command Z if you're working on a Mac. We talked about the property inspector and all the properties that are available for the different symbols that we have on the stage. In this particular case, we worked with MovieClips, and we looked at the property inspector where we can set instance names and tints, the X, the Y, the height, the width. Q is a shortcut key for the free transform tool. I tend to just select it off the toolbar because I keep that toolbar docked on my left-hand side. But again, if you don't have your toolbars docked and you want to get into the free transform tool, you can use the Q key as a shortcut. F9 opens the action panel in Windows. Command F9 opens the action panel inside your Mac. And again, One thing I didn't go over that I do want to go over is the preferences that I actually have set up inside of ActionScript for Flash. So let's drop into our development environment real quick, just one fast second, so I can show you the preferences if you want to match my color coding as we move forward in the tutorials. All right, let's go ahead and minimize the presentation. I'm going to go back into the Flash environment. One thing I do want to show you is because my color coding is a little bit different, and I use the color coding that I've got set because it just appears better on the screen for the recordings. If you want to match your ActionScript panel to mine, you can go up under Edit, Preferences, and it'll bring up the preference box for your version of Flash. Select the ActionScript panel, and these are how I've got my settings set up for ActionScript. And the key thing here is the colors that I'm using, because these are not the default colors for ActionScript. Again, I've actually set my colors this way because it appears better when I do the recordings. I've got my foreground set to black. My keywords are red. Identifiers are green. Obviously, my background is white. My comments will be a light gray, and my strings are going to appear as blue. I'm using a Verdana 12-point font, regular style, and I'm using that again because it's normally a little bit bigger than I would normally use when I'm writing my own code, but it does make it appear better. Let me go ahead and click OK from this panel. By the way, this would be a great time to pause if you want to go ahead and mimic these settings on your screens. Then I'm going to go ahead and click OK, but it does make this appear a little bit bigger than it normally would appear when I'm doing my normal development, and it should make it a little bit easier for you to read inside your viewer, your video viewer. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial on Flash Essentials.